Whether on the field, on the court, or on the balance beam, there's more to winning than the final score. Hi, I'm Patrick Manning of Black Desert Resort. We recognize the effort it takes to succeed. That's why we are proud to partner with Utah Checkdown, the podcast that tells you the story before the game, then gives you a recap of what happened when it's all over, the grit, the glory, and the disappointments. Join us for stories of Utah's finest athletes and coaches. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong, happy to be with you today on this Monday morning. It's the day after the Super Bowl. Depending on your allegiance, or maybe not, you're maybe happy or sad based on how things went on Sunday. My family, my wife's family, is huge Chiefs fans. They've been Chiefs fans since, they were terrible, and so it was a rough day for them yesterday. But look, like they're on their dynasty team. Like, this isn't like it sucks to lose, but it is what it is. I have another son who's also an Eagles fan, so he's pretty happy today. Yeah, I'm a Cowboys fan, and I have an Eagles fan as a son. That makes no sense, but, here we are. I love Jalen Hurts. I love, Saquon Barkley. So, I'll do that. I think my fandom in sports isn't as strong as it used to be. I don't get emotionally invested in games. Especially the Cowboys, because they haven't been good for 25 years or whatever it is. When I was a kid, I was watching them win Super Bowls. They were the Chiefs of those days, and now they're nothing. So, yay for me. Anyways, yes, it was a Super Bowl. Let me first tell you about our sponsors, and then we'll continue on to here. But at Black Desert Resort, you can truly indulge in luxury your way. Whether you choose a sleek studio or an expansive 4-bedroom suite, you're just moments away from teeing off on a championship golf course, savoring top-tier dining, relaxing poolside, or exploring the rugged beauty of southern Utah. Whatever thrill you seek, it's right outside your door. Your journey awaits at blackdesertresort.com. Get lost and find luxury. So yeah, Super Bowl. Britton Covey, former Utah receiver and return specialist. He gets a Super Bowl ring, his first of his career. Wasn't able to play in this game, was on the IR and was not cleared to be able to play for Sunday. So injuries are frustrating based on a neck injury that he had, and it sucks for him, but he gets a ring. So that means, a former Utah player gets a ring and all that. So it also means the end of football season, despite what commercials are trying to tell you about the UFL. You may be into that. I personally, I don't need football that bad to watch, but, there's a special kind that enjoy that. And if you're that person, great for you. It's more football, and obviously there's a lot of talent that's still there. There's, a lot of former local athletes that go play in these leagues and stuff like that. So it's a great opportunity. I'm not trying to demean it or anything. It's just not something that I check out. But it was a fun Super Bowl. It was fun to be able to see that, just kind of the Eagles and what they were able to do. Personally, loved the Kendrick Lamar halftime show. There's just so much nuance to it, and just a lot of things. And the fact that he's playing the long game with his beef with Drake, and he ends it with game over. You have Serena Williams out there. Everything about it. He had an entire stadium singing about, I don't know the easiest way to say that, but the things that Kendrick is alleging Drake to do. So when you have a whole crowd singing A minor, you've resonated with that. So that comes on the heels of Kendrick winning a bunch of Grammys. He's in his hot moment right now, and I don't want to get too hyperbolic by any means, but I think based on the context and everything, that was probably one of the best halftime performances that I've ever seen. I know there's a lot of people, especially I saw on Twitter, that were not happy with the Super Bowl, felt it was boring. They also don't like Kendrick, and that kind of music. So I'm sorry to you. That's fine. For me, I love all kinds of music, and Kendrick is one of my favorite, and so it was fun to be able to see. So, great opportunity to be able to see that long game come together, and to see him just basically end Drake in front of everybody. So it was fun. But no, this isn't a national podcast. We're not going to go over Super Bowl stuff a lot. So, it was a fun weekend. I hope you had fun, spend time with family or friends or whatever you did, or just sat by your lonesome. That's great. I hope you had a fun weekend. I feel like this is, obviously the one weekend of the year where really everyone comes together and tries to have a party, even if you've never really watched football or anything like that. It's just a fun time. Got some ribs on the smoker, had some finger foods, that kind of stuff. It was a great night for all. So, well, except for my Chief family, and their frustrations. But, it is what it is. All right, let's move on to Utah sports. Enough with the Super Bowl. Enough with Kendrick and his ultimate diss track on Drake. We're gonna shift to Utah. So we're gonna mix things up a little bit today. We're gonna start with Utah women's basketball. And the reason I'm doing that is to highlight a lot of what they're doing that is pretty remarkable. They beat UCF on Saturday 95-51. This wasn't one of those games that you're looking at that's just like against a top 25 team and they just absolutely manhandled them. This is a UCF team that really is struggling. They've won one conference game all year. They're not these world beaters by any means, and Utah really made them pay. It was a second quarter that UCF kind of mucked things up a little bit, but for the most part, Utah had no problem putting them away. Was pretty easy. Early on, it seemed like UCF was trying to take away the perimeter. That's what Utah's known for, obviously, is shooting three-pointers and being able to take an advantage that way. And so Kennedy McQueen and Gianna Kneepkens and I think it was Maya Torre, all of these three found a great connection, and it mostly benefited Gianna, where Gianna was able to find these backdoor cuts. I think it was 3 straight times that she found this backdoor cut for an easy open layup to get the points started. So she got a quick 6 points off of backdoor cuts. Lane was wide open. It was beautiful. She did what she needed to be able to relax the defenses a little bit. Not that this defense was, top level. They had their moments and they really tried to make them pay in the first half, really kind of made it aggressive against Utah and did all that. But then Utah, they found their shot from behind the arc, and there was they put distance on UCF very quickly. There was a point where Maddie Wilkie hit 3 straight three-pointers in consecutive possessions, and there's nothing much you can do when somebody goes on a personal 9-0 run in less than like a minute, maybe it was a minute and a half. I didn't write it down, so hard to know exactly. But this was one of those things where Utah just controlled it. So that's essentially it for that. Well, let me say, so Utah made 16 3-pointers, shot 48% from deep, and that's the most they had all season. They've made in a game. Gianna Kneepkens had 6 3-pointers, Maddie Wilkie 4, Kennedy McQueen had 3, and Jenna Johnson 2, and Reese Ross 1. As a note, so 16 made 3-pointers. UCF only had 19 made shots all night. So that kind of shows to the efficiency that Utah had, not just from the floor, but from behind the perimeter. They did really well. They assisted on 28 of their 32 made baskets. This was a free-flowing offense that did phenomenal. And for the most part, Utah didn't even score in the last 3:18. So, the century mark was there. I think, Utah fans in attendance wanted to see it, but it didn't really matter. You beat them by 44 points, so it wasn't a big thing. So the point that I'm making here is obviously it's a great opportunity. Gianna Kneepkens finished with a career-tying 32 points. As I said, she made 6 3-pointers on 10 of 11 shooting. Incredible performance by her. 6 of 7 from deep. That was her only miss, was another 3-pointer. She was perfect from the free throw line at 6 of 6. She did everything that she needed to in that game. And in a lot of ways, it was a response to how she performed against Texas Tech a few days prior on the road. Texas Tech, they're a decent team, but they're, more similar to UCF than they are, a Kansas State or a TCU or something like that. And Texas Tech held Kneepkens to 6 points. And so this was kind of one of those bounce-back performances where she really wanted to establish herself. And it wasn't like she was trying to create her own shots all the time. That's what she does, but it wasn't like she was looking for it all the time. She passed it up. She moved the ball around. But she was also finding ways to be able to get the shot that she needed. So the 3-point shots, when it was there, she took it. But if not, she had either the backdoor cuts or she drove to the rim. There was a lot of different ways that she found her shot. And obviously the 3-point shots were the ones that really beefed up those numbers. And she has, a 30 points in the last 3 of 4 games. I mean, that kind of shows to the level that she's been at right now, really hitting her stride, doing what she needs to. And it's helping the rest of the team as well. Kennedy McQueen benefits from that. Jenna Johnson, Reese Ross, Maddie Wilkie, all of these players benefit from that. Maya Torre had, a relatively quiet game, even though she had 8 points and 11 rebounds. I mean, she was a force in the post. But, all of these players benefit when somebody like Gianna, is able to hit at the pace or at the rate that she is. So, this is a well-balanced team. It has the ability to be able to contend with anybody. Obviously, we've had some problems this year at times, mostly due to turnovers. And Gavin Peterson, the head coach, calls it my turn ball. He says that there's moments where this team, they get in this more selfish mode where they decide to start looking for their own shots instead of passing it up. It's more rare with this team. They do pass it a lot, as that 28 assists on 32 made buckets shows. That's more likely what this team is. But there are those moments, right? And when they get into those my turn plays or these turnovers, and sometimes they spiral, that's where Utah really kind of struggles. And against teams that we saw earlier in the season, like a Kansas State, those early turnovers just absolutely were the difference in a game against a top-tier team. So, against a team like UCF, not bad. They did end up with 17 turnovers, which is not great. You want to be able to cut that number in half at least, get into the single digits to be able to compete. But this is still a team that, for the most part, is able to get what they need to, especially with their shots, as long as the shots are falling. So, let me transition a little bit over to kind of what kind of historical precedence this team is under, right? So last year, everybody's looking, or the last 2 years really, Alyssa Peely. Everybody talked about Alyssa Peely, and yeah, you had Gianna, and outside of most of the season last year after she suffered a season-ending injury. But you had, this force in the post. And so there was a lot of talk about kind of what she did, right? And I think there was a lot of praise for this team in being able to recognize kind of what she did. And then when she left the WNBA, there was this just kind of subconscious feeling that Utah was going to take a step back. And to some extent they did, right? I mean, you lose this massive force that's playing in the WNBA, you're going to feel some effects of that. And so, I think that was what the natural tendency was, to not leave Utah in the top 25. Utah gets into the top 25 for about a week and then loses to Kansas State, has another game that they dropped that they had no business really losing, and suddenly you're outside again. Earlier today, they were back in receiving votes, and so they're just outside. I think they were like 28 if you were to expand it. But this is a team that, they have the ability to be able to compete. And they can still compete at that high level without an Alyssa Peely, right? And I think it's a little bit more balanced, whereas last year, and it's hard to say because Gianna Kneepkens wasn't there for much of the season. I think it would have changed a little bit with her being able to create her own shot. You had to turn to Kennedy McQueen to be able to kind of be that shot maker, and she can, but she had, that wasn't her role to always be, to create her own shot and kind of get the offense flowing. It was much more around Gianna, and then she became an asset to that, to be able to be somebody that as you kind of focus on Gianna, then you can kick it out to Kennedy and she can hit her threes. Obviously a high efficiency shooter. We'll say that 4 times fast, but she was able to do it. But I think now that you've got them pairing up together and mixing that up, you've also got your your post play in Maya Torre and Jenna Johnson, you can provide some physicality down there. You can be able to get your shots down there. Reese Ross, she has that ability to be in there as well. She came off the bench in this last game for 10 points and 8 rebounds. So, she comes off the bench and still almost gets a double-double. Shows kind of the level that Utah has there, the depth that they have. But obviously this team relies heavily on their shooting. So let's look at this. Over the weekend, I decided to look at this exclusive club that college basketball players, you can be the pros as well, but I'm looking at this from a college basketball standpoint. This exclusive club of the 50-40-90 club. And what that is it's 50, shooting 50% field goals or higher, 40% 3-point percentage, and a 90% free throw percentage. Tough numbers, right? Some of these players in the country can easily get 50-40, but that 90 number at free throws doesn't always help. There's always like two of the three that players can get, but to be able to get all of those numbers above 50-40-90 is a very, very tough thing to do. As I did the research, since 2000, that's as far as back as I decided to go. I could have gone further, but 2000 seemed like a good number. That's 25 years. It feels good. So since that, so in 25 years, only 14 women have done it since 2000. So the person that leads that, the one that had the highest of all those is Eva Hodgson from William and Mary, 2019 to 2020. So more recent. She finished with 54% field goal, 43.2 three-pointers, and 91.2 from the free throw line. Most notably, probably arguably one of the most known female basketball players is Sue Bird from UConn. She did that in 2001, 2002, obviously had a phenomenal WNBA career. She finished with 50.5% from the field, 46.6 behind three-point line, and then 94.2% from the free throw line. So why am I saying that? Why does it matter? The reason it matters is because looking at this year, there are two players, Gianna Kneepkens and Kennedy McQueen, who are the only players in the country that are currently in that club. There's still obviously a few games. I think Utah has 6 games left in the regular season. And so there's still times for this to increase or fall. But right now, both of them are in the club. And to have 2 on the same team, as I said, 14 women in the entire country over the last 25 years have done it. To have 2 in the country already in that club is pretty remarkable. And Utah has a third just outside of that with Maddie Wilkie. So she's not quite there yet. Her biggest, we'll call it an issue. Is that really an issue? Is her field goal percentage is at 47.8%. So she's just outside of the 50%. Obviously, she could go on a run here. If she's shooting like she did against UCF, where she made 4 straight three-pointers, that number's going to go up. So, we'll see. We'll monitor that. But where they're at is Gianna Kneepkens leads the country with a 51.3% field goal percentage, 46.7 three-point percentage, and a 91.5 free throw percentage. And she's doing it at a very she shoots a lot, essentially. So, I think there's only, looking at my numbers, there's only 2 people in the country that shoot more than her that are on this list of athletes that are kind of in the mix. And the 2 that shoot more than her only have a high percentage from 3-point. So their field goal percentage and free throw numbers don't put them in that club. So the fact that Gianna's doing that at the high clip that she is and the games that she's been able to do kind of shows to the level of efficiency she does. She shot more free throws than any of the women on this list that's currently for this season that are in the mix. She's had 106 free throw attempts, and the fact that she's shooting 91.5%, that's pretty remarkable. She's shot 152 three-pointers. She's shot 267 field goals. So, she's doing this at a very high rate. And so the fact that she can be in that club is pretty remarkable. Next, you've got Kennedy McQueen. She's shooting 50.7% from the field, 42.7 from deep, and 93.3 from the free throw line. She obviously missed some time, but my threshold here is you had to play at least 15 games. I feel like that was a decent number to kind of show, and there really wasn't much difference if you expanded it, but 15 games feels appropriate. She's played in 18, so a little bit lower than, Gianna at 23, but not much. She, doesn't shoot it as much, but she's still obviously as efficient. she's a starter. She gets those minutes and she's able to do it. That's pretty remarkable to be able to have two of your top players, two starters that are in that mix. As I said, only 6 players in the country right now have at least 2 of those metrics where they're above that. And so it's one of those things where even though some of these players may be close, they're not in other areas. They may be just outside of it, but this is a remarkable thing for Utah. Some of these players come and go, so I've updated this list a few times over the weekend as the stats come in and the games have played. There's been some players that have kind of shifted around and are kind of in the mix, but for the most part, Gianna Kneepkens, Kennedy McQueen, and Maddie Wilkie are all in that mix. And if you can finish the season in that club, it kind of shows to the efficiency level that Utah has with these two. It shows that they have the ability to be able to do it. Now, that doesn't translate necessarily to wins, right? Obviously, because you shoot the ball at a high rate doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to win games, but it does show that when these players are impacting the game, they usually hit at a high rate, and they're doing so in a way that impacts their team. And so as much as the talk has been about Alyssa Peely leaving and this Utah team hasn't really found a way to kind of take over from there, it couldn't be further from the truth. Obviously, there's things that this team needs to improve on, right? I don't see them as a finished product at all. I think the margin for error was far lower last year just because Alyssa could kind of erase some of those things. But at the same time, when Lynn was the head coach, she talked about not having Alyssa actually frees up this team a little bit more to be able to share the ball. With Alyssa, you were going to demand respect because you had to give it to her, and she was going to be able to take it to the post and to the rim and to be able to do what she needed to. Yeah, she could spread it out and she could hit at the three-point line, but at the same time, it really kind of became an inside game only with an occasional kick out, right? And as we saw last year, that hurt Utah at times because it wasn't as free-flowing. Granted, Utah didn't have some shot makers like a Gianna Kneepkens on the floor to be able to do that. Yeah, you had Kennedy and you had Maddie and you had some other players able to step up a bit, but you do need that star player. And, Gianna Kneepkens is just one of the rare breeds that can create her own shot, that can do a lot of things that just take over games. And so this is a team, like I said, the margin for error is probably larger, but at the same time, you're getting a team that when they're hitting and when they're playing together as a team, it's pretty remarkable. And the fact that you have 2 players in that exclusive club is even more impressive. If you could get Maddie Wilkie in there, I mean, that goes down in history as honestly one of the best performing teams of all time. So, maybe that's hyperbolic. I don't know. We got to look at that. But the fact that you can have that efficiency is pretty impressive. Sure, you've got to win on the court, and that's what people are going to remember you for. You're not going to look back and say, like, oh, man, Utah got out of the first round of the playoff or the NCAA tournament, but, man, they were an efficient shooting team. Like, yeah, nobody cares about that, right? Like, you want to win games. That's what people care about. So with that kind of transition, let's look at kind of their tournament hopes, kind of what they're hoping to do. Right now, and the latest bracketology, which usually gets released on a Tuesday, so I don't have that one yet. So this is going off of last one. I don't imagine it changes much either yet, but the latest one has them as a 7 seed playing in Los Angeles. They would be paired up with a USC, which is number 2 seed in this. Obviously, that would be a very tough game. USC has some phenomenal talent. Utah knows what that talent is like after having to play them last year, so this would be an interesting draw. If you're Utah, you obviously hope that they can improve their seed. I don't imagine a world barring, and there's last 6 games, and I'll get to those in a sec, barring you beating teams that are ranked and being able to do things that way. I think Utah's kind of in the mix between a 5 to 7 seed. But like I said, things could change where they improve that drastically. I just don't see it at this point in the season. But if you can get above that 7 seed, that's a great opportunity for you. That makes it a little bit easier. You're not being paired up with a team like a USC or something like that. It doesn't mean that the draw is going to be easier, but it's just, USC would be a tough draw. So, that's still a ways out. Utah still has 6 games left in the regular season. Their schedule as of right now is against Colorado on Wednesday. That's a team that's kind of in the mix, just outside of where Utah is in the standings. So looking at the standings real quick before I finish the schedule, Utah is technically tied for second in the Big 12, but there's a lot of nuance there. If you were to expand it out, they're about 6th because there's a big tie right now between three teams at the top. So you've got TCU at 11, Kansas State, which is ranked 14th. Sorry, I'm all over the place here. Let's start over here. Standings. 11th ranked TCU, 14th ranked Kansas State, and 25th ranked Baylor are all tied atop the conference with a 10-2 record. There's some crazy stuff this weekend where Kansas State lost, TCU lost, Oklahoma State won, those kinds of things. And so it provided a little bit more, more of a road for other teams to be able to get to the top of the conference going into the Big 12 tournament. So you got those three at the top. Right in the mix with Utah. So Utah's 9-3 on the season, so they're a game behind those three top teams. They're in the mix with number 18 West Virginia, number 20 Oklahoma State, and then Utah's obviously receiving votes. So you've got 6 teams right there that are essentially ranked. I'm not going to count Utah's ranked, but they're receiving votes, so we'll kind of put that in that kind of category. Those are the 6 top teams in the country. And, I don't think there's much of an argument there in being able to Big 12. It's a Monday. We're gonna go with that. Iowa State is 8-5, so they're just outside looking in, and then Colorado is 7-5. So those are kind of your teams, top 8 teams that are competing in the Big 12. And so we'll see how that goes. The Big 12 tournament, you get the top 4 teams will get 2-round byes, so you don't have to play the first 2 days. Obviously, that would be very beneficial for Utah. But as you've seen sometimes in these tournaments, that being able to play, kind of get that momentum early helps you. It just depends. So we'll see there. Right now, as it stands, if Utah were to stay at 6th, just assuming that they are the worst of those 6 teams, just based on them not being ranked and the other 5 being ranked. I'm not going to go through the tiebreakers like I've done in football before, especially since there's so many games left. Assuming that they're 6th, they would get a first-round bye, but they'd have to play the second day. And they would have to play either the winner of the 11th seed or the 14th seed. At this point, that would be Kansas at 11 and Arizona State at 14. So, winnable games by all means. But being able to get to that second day bye would be beneficial for Utah just for the fact of rest, being able to, gear up for that, still face tough competition. But it comes with some drawbacks too, especially if you get a team that played on the first day and they hit some magic, and then they're, coming into this team with 2 wins already under their belt. They've got this momentum. You can see teams that absolutely make problems for these higher ranked teams because of that. So, regardless of what happens in the Big 12 tournament, Utah should be a lock for the NCAA tournament. But if you're looking to improve your seed line, you've got to finish strong in your schedule. You've obviously got to, have somewhat of a showing at the NCAA tournament, especially if you're trying to improve, or the Big 12 tournament. But we'll see. It's still a few weeks out, and so it's tough to fully see that, but we'll kind of look at that. So anyways, getting back to the schedule, Utah essentially has 3 teams mixed in with 3 other teams. It's easily balanced where they're going to be competing for spots in the standings, right? So Colorado, even though Colorado's a few spots below them, they're still kind of in that mix, right? And so I'm classifying them in there. But at the same time, you've got a good balance of this schedule of difficult and easy in some respects. Easy being a loose term because, as we've seen with Utah, they don't always make that easy. So you've got that. So you've got Colorado on Wednesday, good home game for Utah to be able to contend with. Obviously a team that they're familiar with for their years in the Pac-12. So you've got that. Then on Saturday, you've got Arizona State. You're on the road for that game. The last time these two played, Utah won 102-82. So it's easy to look at this and say that Utah could absolutely just, destroy Arizona State. But road games aren't always easy. Utah's had some struggles on the road at times. But that should be a winnable game. And then you come back home for a very tough challenge with Oklahoma State. I'd argue that Oklahoma State is probably the hottest team in the Big 12 right now. The way that they're playing, they're just on a good run that is allowing them to be able to, pick off these wins against top teams. There's a bunch of teams here that are good, but I think this Oklahoma State team is really kind of hitting its stride, and it'll be a tough out for Utah. But you get them at home. Great opportunity for Utah to be able to have a fun environment where, if Utah can handle their business this week, and I'm assuming they could, maybe you get into the top 25, and now you've got a top 25 clash again at the Huntsman Center, next week. So you've got that, and then you've got at Cincinnati. That should be a winnable game, and then you're back on the road. This one's probably one of your This is your toughest game left, arguably because of where it is. It's on the road, so you travel to West Virginia, and you have to compete against them. Obviously, as I mentioned, ranked 18th. So you got that, and then you close out the season against BYU at home. That was a tough one in Provo. Utah came away with an 81-76 win, but turnovers absolutely were the story of that game. So we'll see what that's like. Obviously, a rivalry that you never know what's going to happen. But this is a BYU team that honestly is competing more for the middle to the end of the standings. They've got pieces, Delaney Gibb, phenomenal freshman talent. She wins the Freshman of the Week award every single week. I vote in these awards, and there's really no second best, right? Like there's a week every once in a while where somebody else can kind of best her, but she's been pretty remarkable. So, we'll see what happens with them. But that's I would say it's a fair schedule. It's not easy by any means, but you've got opportunities there to be able to get more, quad one wins. Women don't use those as much as men's do because, it's just not talked about as much, but there's still quad one. You've got other wins where you can kind of show that you can still beat up on lower opponents, improve your seed line, maybe get up to a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament, whatever that may be. More importantly, it's improving your seed line in the Big 12 tournament standings. So curious to see where that goes. Obviously, a lot of games left for all of these teams. Utah's 6th right now based on how that's all shaken out, but you could finish 1st, you could finish 10th. It really just depends on how Utah manages this last stretch. So interesting to look at, but I would encourage you, if you haven't gone to a women's basketball game, Wednesday's a great opportunity to get a competitive game. Tickets are much cheaper. Well, they're generally about the same as the men's, but you can sit anywhere you want. This is a good team that if you're looking for some fun basketball as you head into March, and this is kind of gearing you up for that, and the men's team isn't really helping you. The women's team, by all means, is there. So, you can be frustrated with the run on Utes, and I understand it, but this women's team is absolutely worth your time. So check them out. Let's move on to the Red Rocks. We're going all women today. Red Rocks come away with a win over the weekend against Arizona. Arizona is much improved, by the way, in the Pac-12. They weren't at the top most of the years, and they were still kind of in that secondary mix, but they've definitely improved. They're still not where they want to be, but you're seeing improvement from a team that, can take it seriously, and honestly is probably the best competition that Utah's going to face in the Big 12 this year. There's just not a lot of competition in the Big 12 now that Oklahoma's not there, and so Utah's had to find, other games or meets, where they can get some of that competition. So, you had the Sprouts competition, the meet. You had Florida a couple weeks ago when they traveled to West Virginia. You'll have UCLA at the end of the season. You even get Washington. So they're still competing with a lot of these top-tier teams, but the Big 12 itself just isn't there. So you get the win. Utah scores its second highest score of the season, a 197-675. There's still things that they could have pointed to, but if, anybody that was there on, Friday night, that was a rocking place. That was honestly one of the most electric crowds I've seen from the Red Rocks in a while. And that's saying something because there's always an electric crowd there. The Huntsman Center is always full. It's pretty remarkable to be able to see, women's gymnastics be able to have that type of success where every single meet is nearly sold out, and, all of the lower bowls filled, almost all of the upper bowl is filled, easily outdraws men's and women's basketball. So great opportunity for these women to be able to kind of excel and do it in a way that just kind of highlights who they are. So Friday was the 50th birthday bash is what they call it. So 50 years that the Red Rocks have been around. It was also for the women's on Saturday, 50 years, little thing called Title IX allowed that kind of stuff to happen. So obviously doing well for the women's sports at Utah. So one of the, there's a lot of highlights from this meet, and I'm not going to get into all of them, but one of them was Avery Neff's return. This is the freshman gymnast, number one recruit in the country. She chooses Utah in her backyard, from South Jordan. This is where she wanted to go. She loves Utah and was really already early making significant strides to help this team. And then she suffers, two ankle injuries, serious ankle injuries, where it looked like her season was done. Just even optimistic looks where like maybe she gets into postseason. Even then, like trying to be able to rehab on something like that, where in gymnastics you use your feet quite a lot. You're hitting them, you're twisting, you're bending. When you have sprained ankles that are pretty severe, any movement, anybody that's had a sprained ankle, especially a more severe one, that's excruciating pain. But 3 weeks later, Avery Neff competed on bars, which is a remarkable accomplishment. Bars, for those that don't know gymnastics very well, bars is probably the easiest to be able to do. Yes, you still have to land and have on your dismount, you have to kind of stick your landing, but you're in the air, right? Like you're not doing anything that is going to hurt your feet necessarily. There are, things where you can stand on the lower bar to move up to the upper bar, those types of things that will, you can impact your feet and stuff like that. And you can, there's still things, but for the most part, it's pretty easy in terms of coming back. Then there's other ones that you can kind of move to. Floor is probably the most challenging because there's a lot of flipping. Beam is pretty challenging because you're flipping and doing different things on an even smaller area. So, the fact that she was even able to come back there, she said in the post-meet interviews, she talked about how she didn't even think she was going to be able to get here or to compete in that meet, but she made it a goal that that's where she wanted to compete. She wanted to be there for the 50th anniversary and being able to compete in front of, all the alumna and all that showed up and were able to be there. And she did. And, a week ago, she was still using her walker. She was walking better, but she had a walker that she had to use, was still trying to get around. And in that time, in 3 weeks' time, she was able to do what she needed to. So she's still not cleared. She's still not fully out of the woods, but the fact that she was able to do that and that Utah can rely on her is pretty remarkable. So curious to see how her development goes for the rest of the season. She was competing in the all-around and doing really well in it, especially as a freshman. So getting her back, especially her on vault, would be pretty remarkable. But that one's going to be a tough challenge. So we'll see. But that's, remarkable ability to be able to rehab and get there. This isn't something like Utah's pushing her. This is just literally her being able to rehab and do what she needs to. There's been dark moments. It's easy to celebrate her now, but there's been dark moments for her that she said, and there was doubts, but she's back on the floor mat. So really fascinating to be able to see that. Real quick, other highlights from this. Grace McCallum continues to just, she's showing her maturity and just her ability to kind of lead this team. She scores a 9.9 on vault and bars, and then a 9.925 on beam and floor. Most impressive is her vault. She's really coming into developing that at a higher level. If you remember, a couple of years ago, she suffered a serious injury that almost took her out for the season, but she was able to compete in postseason play and was able to get there, but it still wasn't fully there. So for a whole year, essentially, she hasn't been doing the same vault that she's always done, at the high level that she's been able to do. And so her scores have been lower. It's still kind of one of those nerve-wracking things to be able to come back to that. And she's now getting to the point where she's able to throw those 1.5s and being able to do what she needs to be able to have the 10-0 start value. And she's improving there. So good for her, being able to get to where she needs to go. She has so much potential. And I think because of her difficulty and so many tricks, it's easier for the judges to, take deductions. But that's just who she is. She's going to compete at a high level, and she wants to be able to put the best out there. And she's consistently scoring over 9.9s at least almost every single week. So she finishes with a 39.650 all-around score to win. But right behind her was McKenna Smith with a 39.625. McKenna had one event that she didn't score as well, but everything else was pretty remarkable. And most impressive was her vault. She's really honed in on being able to stick her vault. She's had 4 straight meets where it's been a perfect stick. This last one was arguably her best, and she scores a 9.975. Should have probably had a 10. if you slow it down and look at it, her feet were a tiny bit separated coming off of the table. And so I'm assuming that's what one of the judges gave her a 9.95 for. The other gave a 9 or a 10. But I mean, the fact that she's there kind of shows the level that they're at. McKenna, she's really taken that step forward, and she's really kind of coming into her own. She's an energy provider, great for the team, and it's been pretty fun to watch. So, those two are great. Obviously, if you get Avery Neff back in there, you've got 3 potential all-arounders that can do well and really help Utah. But, once again, this is a team that's in the mix for a national championship. It's a weird season, but I think Utah has what it takes to be able to get there. Obviously, they've been to every nationals since the NCAA began. But this is a team that can be in the mix. There's times where they struggle, and things don't always hit, but there's definitely a ton of potential. They get their season high on an event on floor where they got a 49.575. And so you're seeing this team kind of slowly peaking, right? Like they're slowly getting there, improving. And so we'll see kind of how that goes. Outside of that, another I wanted to highlight, and I'll just end with this one, Ella Zerbez. She's been dealing with some performance anxiety issues. Had a great freshman season, was trying to improve, but then these performance anxiety issues kind of have manifested themselves on floor. She's had moments where she hasn't been able to continue, and just everything kind of surrounds her, and it's been a tough challenge. But they've been working really hard, with psychologists and other things to be able to help her, and she's really embraced it. In the last few weeks, she's been able to get over that and compete. So pretty fun to be able to watch her, because when she's performing at her best, she really can be in the mix as one of the best athletes on this roster. So really curious to see how she goes. She's still young, sophomore, still a lot that she can do, but I mean, another talented gymnast for Utah that they're able to have in the wings that, she's going to be in the mix in a lot of these events. But she can only get better from here. So with that, we're going to end on the running Utes, and all I'm going to say on the running Utes is woof. Man, it's been rough. And, I've covered this team for a very long time, and there's moments where you feel like they put things together and they start turning the corner, and then it just kind of falls apart. And, I don't want to say it's all on Craig Smith, and I've said this on the podcast a lot. There's a lot of things behind the scenes that are making it very challenging for him to be able to do what he needs to do. But at the same time, there's some decision-making, I think, at this point where it becomes a challenge, right? Like, he's trying so hard to be able to find anybody that can be able to compete at a consistent level that it just kind of drags everything down. And, Utah was arguably in its easiest stretch of the schedule, games that they should have been able to win or at least be in the mix. And it just hasn't really been that way. And this is another season where Utah is going to miss out, obviously, on postseason play in terms of the NCAA tournament. At this rate, they're not going to get an NIT, and I don't think that would benefit them anyway at this point. But it's a real challenge for the running Utes, and there's just not a lot of optimism around this team. Fans are still coming out, they're still showing up and trying to support this team, but it's just not been consistent, and that's really where it comes down to. So I'm not going to get into all this. We've talked about this, right? Like, we can continue to just, commiserate and talk about how, the running Utes need to be back. Yeah, everybody understands it. And I don't think that there's one easy answer here. You can say, okay, we can let Craig Smith go and suddenly things are going to be better. But as I've mentioned, unless you're going to get an influx of cash and you're going to get some other things that are tied into this, more institutional support, this is where Utah's at. So they really have to hone in on who they want to be. Do they want to be a competitive basketball team? Do they want to compete in the Big 12? Or is this just going to be another one of those things where Utah just continues to say, we're going to be mediocre in basketball. We don't really care about that. We'll focus on football. We'll focus on women's basketball and gymnastics. We'll focus on many of these other sports. I personally think that's a mistake, especially since men's basketball is your second biggest money driver for the department. And with these schools going to have to pay more for athletes and taking more out of their budgets, you can't afford to not pay attention to your second biggest moneymaker. You can't just suck football dry and expect to be able to succeed. So really curious, really fascinated to see what Utah does with this moving forward. I think the writing's on the wall. Whether Craig is gone this year or next, barring him able to kind of have a quick turnaround, I don't think that there's a lot of, what I wanted to say, like a lot of internal hope that he's going to stay. And I think Craig's feeling that, which is unfortunate. Like I said, I'm not here to defend Craig by any means, but I don't think he's fully the problem. Knowing some of the things that I've heard and from talking to people, I don't think this is fully on Craig. So really interesting situation, but there's not much what you can do. So with that, we're going to wrap up this podcast. We'll keep it a little shorter today, 45 minutes, shorter than what it has been, a little extra. But, this is... Right now, if you're frustrated with the run on Utes, by all means, channel that energy and watch a lot of these women that are performing at a high level. Women's basketball is a lot of fun. As I mentioned, a lot of efficiency there. Red Rocks are always a party. If you've never been to a gymnastics meet, even if you don't understand it, I guarantee you'll have a fun time at a Red Rocks meet. So it's interesting, but we'll see how it goes. So that's it for today. If anything comes up this week, I'll do a second podcast, but for the most part, we'll do that until things kind of pick up. So appreciate you listening. Let me know if you have anything, and we'll talk to you later.